Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for episode 21 of Thank Gut It's Fixed. This is Nourition, integrative and functional dietitian and nutritionist specializing in helping people with digestive health and other symptoms that are related to the gut that they may not even know it. Today's episode is going to be on why grazing is actually bad for your gut health. So just to give you a little bit of background, this week a reporter reached out and they are trying to come up with an article and about weight loss and in general health advice, and they asked me what my opinion is, whether I recommend grazing or eating smaller meals throughout the day, or if I'm a proponent of larger, fewer meals in the day. So if you are here and you're listening to this, I would love to see what you think my answer would be, and you may have heard me say this again. Do you think I'm into grazing? Actually, that's kind of silly because I just told you what the video title is, which is why grazing is bad for your digestive health. So I do, in fact, don't recommend grazing or eating a lot of frequent meals. Now, for weight loss, because when you're eating too many times, your body's producing insulin constantly throughout the day, and insulin is your fat storage hormone. It's going to prevent you from losing weight. It's going to promote your body to store more fat in your body. And when you eat a lot, then every time you eat, then you have an opportunity to overeat by a little bit and make sort of bad choices at every opportunity. So it's not really, the more decisions you have to make related to your food, the more overwhelming it can be. And so that's why I do recommend smaller meals for physiologically blood sugar and hormonal issues like insulin, and also just to help take energy, reduce the energy that you have to spend on your food choices. But what's something I don't always get a chance to explain, and a lot of times even reporters don't focus on this because they have a limited number of letters that they want to incorporate in articles, but it's really, of course, something I'm passionate about because I specialize in the gut and I see how that can impact so many people, which is why grazing affects and can contribute to many digestive issues. So what we know is that, I'm going to remind you, give you a little bit of background here. The digestive system, I thought I had an image of the gut in here, but if you remember, it's made of the esophagus, the stomach, and then the small intestine, and then the large intestine. So between the stomach and until you get rid of the food, the body's going to go through a series of motions or contractions that are called peristalsis. And what they're going to do is they're going to help your body chew up the food in your stomach and then push it outside of the stomach, and then food going to go through all of the intestines, and then until they reach the large intestine, and until you develop waste and you poop with whatever is left of your food. Now, these motions, think of if you imagine a knife, a snake sort of trying to move. This is how the wave of motion, that's how the muscles contract in your digestive system. So this motion is going to push the food from the stomach all the way to the large intestine. And it actually takes 3 hours for this motion for everything to get pushed through the small intestine. Now, here's a key thing. So this motion is pushing food so that it can go through all the phases of digestion. But this motion also happens after you eat, and the function or the role of this motion is to get rid of any bacteria or undigested food particles, waste, any waste that you have, move it from the stomach through all of the small intestine until it reaches the large intestines, and then the muscle that connects the small and the large intestine sort of locks up, and then you have more bacteria in the large intestine, and then then there's different functions and parts to each part of your intestines. But we're now focusing on the small intestine, and I want to show you, this is the image where the antrum that's where the stomach is. There's the first phases of the it's called the migratory motor complex, or migrating motor complex. I've seen that, or that's the term that I typically use. And as you can see, like, these are series of motions, And for those of you who are engineers out there, you would appreciate a graph that looks like that. But you can see how it's the muscles get moved or contract until the distal ileum. So ileum is still part of the intestine. So it takes 3 hours for this motion to for it to transfer from the small to the large intestine. Why is this so important? Why am I really focused on this? Remember, like in one of the episodes, I mentioned that your large intestine is where the bulk of the bacteria should be. That's where the fermentation should happen. And if you have bacteria in the small intestine, then you are going to have bacterial overgrowth or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I talked about that in episode 16. The symptoms of that, whether you have it or not, the symptoms may be that you, if you have a problem with your migrating complex, you may have bloating, gas, indigestion. You may have heartburn. You may have constipation because food is not moving properly. And then bacterial overgrowth is having bacteria in the small intestine where they shouldn't be. So if they are there, then they're going to be eating up your food instead of you absorbing and your food. So you may end up with fatigue or with nutrient deficiencies. So we don't want overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. And the MMC, or the migrating motor complex, it's a very key and integral part of your gut health and the smooth muscle contractions in your gut, so that all of this bacteria gets pushed to the large intestine, where it's okay to have them there. That's where they're supposed to be, and that's where the fermentation happens, and but not in the small intestine. So what does this have to do with grazing and eating? Well, guess what interrupts the migrating complex? Eating. So as you can see in the graph that I showed you, is that it takes 3 hours to go through this process. But for some people, it may even take more, because the transit time, or the time it takes from the beginning to the end of the meal, it's going to change between one person to another. People who have thyroid issues are going to have a slower transit time and peristalsis. So if you have constipation, actually you may have, it's interesting, I found 2 ways that you may have MMC because of constipation, or migrating motor complex issues because of constipation. And you can also be constipated because your muscles are not pushing food properly through your digestive system. Grazing is going and eating. So every time you eat, this process stops and it has to reset. It has to start from phase 1, goes back to the stomach. And so if you eat, you finish eating now, and then you do it, and then the process, the cleaning wave starts, and then an hour and a half you eat again, and then reset, go back to the front, go back to the top. So you may never, your small intestine may never actually experience a full wave of cleaning. So it's kind of like you're sweeping your kitchen, you sweep part of it, and then your kids are running around and they go step on the dust and all of the dirt that you collected, and then you have to restart again. And then you do one section of your kitchen and you restart again. So as you can see, cleaning my house with my kids around is not really efficient. The same thing, MMC does not work if you eat, or if you keep interrupting it with food or with meals. We also know that having low hydrochloric acid in the stomach, that's an interesting one, right? It can reduce the speed of MMC, and I've talked about acid, how it's important so many times before. You can go back to a lot of episodes. H. pylori bacteria, which is an infection in the stomach, and that will actually reduce the acidity. The H. pylori will reduce the acidity in your stomach because it wants to thrive, right? And if there's an acid, the H. pylori is not going to thrive. So taking a PPI medication, a proton pump inhibitors, Prevacid or Nexium, whether especially long term, but obviously even a short period of time, will reduce the acid, which is protective. Acid in your stomach is actually protective. H. pylori infections, stress. I was talking to someone earlier today. Your stress is going to affect the gut, and when you are always in a chronic state of stress, your body thinks that it's going to escape because the threat is coming, and so digestion is kind of pushed to the back burner. It's not priority anymore, so the body will shut down this movement. It will shut down the muscle movement, because we need to get all of the energy and all of the blood to our skeletal muscles to run away from this foreign animal or this monster attacking us, except that the stress of our day-to-day lives doesn't really go away. We're carrying it on our shoulders every single day. So Talked about thyroid, lack of exercise, so the lack of activity and motion is going to slow down MMC, eating, low HCl, PPIUs, stress, and constipation, and I throw it through also in the thyroid because it can slow down everything in your body, including the muscle movement of your gut. So what are the symptoms that you may experience if you have that problem? You may feel gas, bloated, as I said, indigestion, heartburn, constipation, and you are more likely to have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and go to episode 16 if you want to know more about that. Now, MMC, what also controls that is hormone. So sometimes there are things that we may not be able to control. You know, if you have like a medical condition that affects the nerve impulses or the nerve signaling between the brain and the gut, but we can control how often we eat. And that's why I do recommend that after you eat, give your body 4 hours between meals so that you allow your gut to actually go through this cleaning motion. And also sleeping, when you sleep, it allows your gut to go through more cleaning and you know, getting rid of waste and pushing bacteria to the large intestine. That's why sleeping is important, and that's why not eating at night is also really important. And also, like as a fun fact, if you hear your stomach growling few hours after a meal, it is very likely that this is your migrating motor complex contracting and the muscles in your gut moving. So next time you hear this sound, all right, guys, we got disconnected. I'm not sure what the last thing I said, but the next time you hear growling noises, know that your body is doing its work and it's doing its job. So if it hasn't been 3 hours yet since your last meal, wait a little bit. Don't quickly eat. Give your body those 3 hours so that you can reduce your risk of any other side effects or long-term side effects from bacterial overgrowth or upset stomach or other GI issues. I hope this was helpful and this was useful. If you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. I know there were a few people here. Email me or just put your comments type your questions in the comments. Thank you again for watching. This was Noor Zubde, functional dietitian and nutritionist, and that was Thank Gut It's Fixed show. I will talk to you next time. Bye.